Shana Tova Nashuva. When the pandemic first struck our nation in March and doctors and nurses didn't have enough masks to keep themselves safe, a doctor named Gabby called me after a long shift in the ER, dealing with so many cases and so much suffering. She told me that she was terrified of catching the coronavirus, and she asked me, she said, "Rabbi, do you believe in guardian angels?" Nashuva, do I believe in guardian angels? I'd like to answer that question for you tonight on this holy Kol Nidre night by telling you a true story. The Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism, he once taught that every journey has a hidden destination of which the traveler is unaware. I'm going to repeat that for you. Every journey has a hidden destination of which the traveler is unaware. And I'm going to ask you to put that teaching on your heart right now. My big brother, Danny, Dr. Daniel Levy, is a renowned cardiologist and researcher. He's the director of the famed Framingham Heart Study. But for tonight, I'd like to take you back to 1988, when Danny was just a young doctor, a pisher, still wet behind the ears. He just turned 34 years old, fresh out of a fellowship in cardiology, and Danny gets invited to his first major public lecture at an esteemed medical conference. He's going to be the featured speaker on the first morning of the first day of the conference in front of hundreds of colleagues. The topic of his talk, sudden cardiac death. What's sudden death? There are many reasons why somebody might suddenly collapse. It could be a seizure, or someone might faint or be choking. But sudden death is when somebody suddenly collapses and they've got no pulse and they're not breathing. There's a very small window of time in a hospital setting to resuscitate somebody whose heart stops beating. But when someone experiences sudden death outside of a hospital, it's overwhelmingly fatal. Even when CPR is administered by bystanders, 90% of those who experience sudden death don't survive. Danny's excited and he's honored to have been asked to give this important lecture, but he's nervous too. He spends weeks preparing. I want to remind you what preparing for a lecture entailed way back in the 1980s, before there was PowerPoint and the whole world at your fingertips on the internet. Danny had to go to the library, Xerox articles, choose the images he wanted to use for his talk, and request a photographic service to shoot the images he wanted. And then he had to take those films to get them developed into slides. You remember those? And then he had to arrange the slides in order onto a carousel that would go into a slide projector on the day of the conference. He had to memorize the order of the slides and pray that no slide got stuck in that carousel. So much prep, excitement, and the anxiety. Danny also planned to include a lighthearted slide saying that sudden death is actually an unusual term because it's not necessarily permanent death. It sounds a lot like Billy Crystal playing that old Jewish wizard in the movie Princess Bride. The wizard's name is Miracle Max, and he says, "It just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Mostly dead is likely alive." Well, it's the night before the conference, and Danny's restless. He wakes up at 6 a.m. I suppose he could have tried to sleep a bit longer and just grab himself a cup of coffee to go before his lecture. But instead, Danny's up and dressed in his suit and tie by 7 a.m. And he decides to sit down in a cafe to allow himself extra time to practice his talk and go over his slides and make sure he's memorized the order. He's at his table in the restaurant, sitting with his notes and his trusty carousel, lost in his own world. Suddenly, he hears a crash. He looks up. There's a man face down, just a few feet away from him. Danny drops everything, jumps up, runs, and flips the man over. He's bleeding from his nose, which he split open when he fell, face down. Danny's on his hands and knees. He feels for a pulse. The man's dead. No pulse, no breathing. Instantly, Danny understands this is a case of sudden death. The very topic of Danny's lecture today. Just then a woman runs over. I'm a nurse. Instantly, the two of them move into action in rhythm together. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and breathe. No pulse. My brother is face to face with this man, breathing into his mouth and his chant in rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and breathe. Within minutes, an ambulance arrives, defibrillates the man, and whisks him away. And Danny realizes he's just given this man a fighting chance to survive sudden death. Danny saved that man's life. Danny gets up from the floor. He looks at his watch. His lecture is just a few minutes from now. His hands are shaking uncontrollably. A shaking he's never experienced before or since in his whole life. Shaking so hard that he can't even hold his cup of coffee to take a sip from it. He looks down at his hands. There's blood on his shirt, blood on his jacket, on his face. He runs to the bathroom to wash his hands and his face, and he races to the lecture hall. It took a while for Danny to catch his breath and stop shaking, and then he began to speak. My brother Danny has given many, many lectures over his career. But this one, on that day, was surely the most memorable of his life. A lecture that sent chills down the spines of all who had come to learn from him. He intended that day to share slides. Instead, with blood on his shirt, he began his talk this way. I've got a story to tell. It was quite a way to open a lecture on sudden cardiac death. Teshuva. How much of life hangs on an instant? How much of your life depends on one meeting? You think you know what you're preparing for. You think you know what your test is. You're nervous about a lecture. You're being called to so much greater than you know. On that day, what mattered most was not how Danny performed for hundreds of people, but how he performed for one soul. That day, my brother didn't grab a cup of coffee to go. He granted himself extra time to prepare, but he didn't know what he was preparing for. Teshuva, you think you're in control? You've got your whole script all memorized with all your slides in proper order. Do you think you get to choose the order? These past 6 months have shown us how everything we thought was predictable can be undone in an instant. We don't get to choose what life's going to throw at us. But we do get to choose how we will respond to a crisis. Will you rise to the situation, or will you deny it's even happening? Will you give life, will you spread death? Last week I asked my brother, I said, Danny, 1988? It was the time when the AIDS virus, the AIDS epidemic was raging. Did you hesitate for even a minute before you put your face to that man's bloody face and breathed into him? Danny said, no, me. At the moment when you hear a bang and you see a body in front of you, it just didn't occur to me. I was just trying to do the best that I could to save someone's life. And that rhythm, Teshuva, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, has been echoing through our world over the past 6 months. It's been repeated millions of times across the world by EMTs and doctors and nurses, and yes, by bystanders, those brave souls who've been risking their lives to save lives. And over these 6 months, 7,000 medical workers have lost their lives to the call of saving one life at a time. One by one, by one, by one. Teshuva, tissue break. Teshuva, it's Kol Nidre tonight. Over the years, many Jews have complained to me that the confessional on Yom Kippur is so schmaltzy. It's so dramatic, so over the top. What's with the self-flagellation, Rabbi? Ashamnu, bagadnu, we have sinned, we have betrayed, we've been stiff-necked. With your fist to your chest. Teshuva, listen to me. It's not flagellation. It's resuscitation. Tonight you're being given the power to do this, not to hurt yourself, to save yourself, to breathe new life into yourself, to give new life to others. What have you declared dead that you still have the capacity to resurrect? Teshuva, check for a pulse. Check to see what can be revived. You can restore your good name. You can restore your word, that your word is true. You can revive love and trust. You can revive your dreams, your hope. You can return to a project you abandoned long ago. Turn it over. Breathe new life into it. And those sacred relationships, the sacred relationships with family members and old friends that have collapsed. You're dead to me? Is there no room for forgiveness on this day of forgiveness? Many, many years ago, I wrote this prayer for a funeral when you have to bury a loved one you stopped talking to. It begins this way. I missed you when you were alive. I missed the words you never spoke, the affection you couldn't give, the apology you wouldn't make. I missed the relationship we never had, the acceptance you couldn't offer. I've spent my whole life missing you, and now that you're gone, I miss you even more. I don't want to stop hoping. I don't want to stop waiting for you. Teshuva, in our hubris, we expect to live long and accomplish things and repair relationships and grow old and bid farewell on our timetable. What we don't expect is to be alive and well 1 minute and dead the next, without having the chance to live out our dreams, to repair or to forgive or even to say goodbye. That's what Yom Kippur is trying to teach you, that you're mortal, that the time to live fully is now. Teshuva, it's not flagellation, it's resuscitation. Do it with me. Give life. You have the God-given power to do that. Several years pass. And my brother Danny is giving a lecture. By now, he's a well-known doctor. He's confident. He's given scores of lectures to thousands of people by now, and he's doing a PowerPoint presentation. At the end, some folks come up to congratulate him and to ask questions, and a man comes forward. My brother thinks he's going to ask a question. He says to Danny, "I saw a listing of your lecture advertised. My name is James. It's me, the man you revived. I had to come, Dr. Levy. I needed to thank you face to face. I wouldn't be around if it weren't for you. I want to thank you for all the extra time." And all at once, Danny flashed back to that day and the man covered in blood with no pulse and no breath. How do you take in the enormity of that sort of gratitude? My brother doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeve, but I can tell you he was deeply moved that James had sought him out and so grateful that he'd been able to give James extra time. Extra time, Teshuva. What would you feel if you were dead and then by some miracle you were granted extra time? What? What would you do with that time? What would you treasure? What would you appreciate? What would you change? So much gratitude. Guess what, Teshuva? Yom Kippur is sudden death. All the rituals we perform today are sudden death rituals. Yesterday, you were healthy and alive. Tonight, like the dead, we don't eat or drink. We dress in white burial shrouds. And this confessional isn't some random guilt trip. It's the deathbed confessional. I've recited it with so many souls as they've left our world. Teshuva, Yom Kippur wants you to experience sudden death and to feel the exhilaration and the gratitude of extra time. All the love, all the appreciation, the forgiveness you're willing to offer and to ask for, the new chance to get it right. Teshuva means you get a do-over. Teshuva, we've all had a moment in our lives when someone saved you when you were lost, when someone comforted you, picked you up, lifted your spirits. Maybe it was years ago. Thank them. Take the time to track them down and tell them what they mean to you. And if you're feeling lost and frightened and lonely and fed up right now in these Corona days, trust that the right person will show up to save you. Trust that there are people who will hold us up when we can't do it alone. Teshuva, on Rosh Hashanah last week, I told you that you might feel a poke. Are you awake? Are you up? On Yom Kippur, God's not that subtle. There's a verse in the Song of Songs I love so much that my husband Rob and I have it engraved inside our wedding rings. Ani yeshena v'libi el kol dodi dofek. I am asleep, but my heart is awake. The voice of my beloved is knocking. Teshuva, we may be asleep, but our hearts can feel God. Bob Dylan says we're all knocking on heaven's door. That's true. But if you've been listening to me through these days of awe, everything below has its mirror image above. And Yom Kippur is where your knocking and God's knocking meet. Teshuva, heaven is knocking on your door, and God says, Pitchi li achoti, open up, my beloved. Just as we're asking God, Pitchu li, open the gates, God's asking the same thing from us. Open your gates, soften your heart. God's gates are flung wide open right now. Where are your gates? Are you ready to look inside your heart? See where it's hardened, what you've been denying, running from, refusing to address. Elevate yourself. Show up with all yourself. Teshuva, I told you. There's a question below, where am I? And a question above, where are you? There's a tribunal below and a tribunal above. There's a knocking below and a knocking above. Do it with me. It's saying, wake up. Come back to the holy life that's yours to have. And Teshuva, I'll let you in on a little secret. There's also a you below and a you above. And you have the power to come closer to who you can be, not who you ought to be, who you were born to be. And tonight, God is knocking to remind you to live up to why you were put here and what you were made for. So listen. Listen carefully. Because you never know when you'll be called to a meeting you're not expecting. Who do you discover yourself to be in a crisis? Show up with all yourself. Come back to your heart. Feel more deeply. There's something you're avoiding. Something you're almost seeing. Something you're not wanting to see. God is knocking, open up. Let this Yom Kippur resuscitate you with a new desire to hear and feel and see and live and give and help and hope. Teshuva. Several more years pass, and my brother Danny gets a letter in the mail. He opened the envelope. Dear Dr. Levy, my name is Andrew. I wanted to let you know that my dad James just died. I was really just a kid when you saved his life. And I just wanted to thank you for all the years you gave me with my dad. Thank you. Thank you for every Christmas, for every chance to celebrate, for every day we wouldn't have had. Thank you for making all that possible. Teshuva. Every journey has a hidden destination of which the traveler is unaware. Yes. Teshuva, you've just been granted the gift of extra time. Use it wisely. And now, I think we can answer Gabi's question. The doctor from the ER on the eve of this pandemic. Do I believe in guardian angels? Yes, most definitely, yes. We are each other's guardian angels, Teshuva. You are the answer to a lot of people's prayers. Rise up to that. Teshuva, I am blessing you with a year of health and healing, a good year, a sweet year, filled with extra time and second chances, higher and higher, Teshuva, in God's light. Amen.